Now.
Hi guys, welcome back to Story Mantra. I'm Lindsay Preston, one of your co-hosts here with Anju Gattani. We are so excited. We had such a great response the past 2 weeks to having Lainey Cameron on that we couldn't help ourselves. We had to bring her back again. You guys seem to have loved her and she was answering so many great questions. You know, we ran out of time the last time you were here, Lainey. So thank you for coming again.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back so soon.
So here's the question. Who doesn't love Lainey? I think everybody in the world loves Lainey. I love her the most, so I get to introduce her. And here's the best part about Lainey. She is every author's best friend. She advocates for everybody's success, which is very rare in today's world where it's a cutthroat industry. About 70,000 books come out every month. And then you have Lainey who's championing everyone's books. So who is Lainey Cameron? She is an author of women's fiction and a recovering tech industry executive. Her award-winning novel, The Exit Strategy, is a #1 Amazon bestseller, and it was inspired by a decade of being the only woman in the corporate boardroom. I didn't mess it up this time. And Lainey has the book to show us, and she's going to show it to us again. There we are. It's a gorgeous cover. It has been called a rallying call for women to believe in themselves and join together. A digital nomad, which Lainey will explain what a digital nomad is to me. She's also an avid Instagrammer and a proud member of Women Fictions Writers Association. She believes community makes the author's life worthwhile. What about her accolades? So besides being every author's best friend, she is a 3-time award winner. Lainey is a gold medalist in the 2020 Reader's Choice Awards for Women's Fiction. She's a finalist in the 2020 Best Book Awards by American Book Fest. She's chosen as a notable indie for 2020 by Shelf Unbound. And Lainey is going to unravel from the author's perspective for all of us something about the New York Times and the USA Today bestselling authors list, how to get there, what do you do, and how on earth do you even understand that? Lainey, over to you.
Okay. All right. So one of my favorite things is busting myths for authors, because there are so many myths out there. You know, you hear all this stuff repeated. I'll give you an example. Oh, if you just get 50 reviews on Amazon, your book's going to do really well. I call bullshit on that. And I'm going to talk about that one too. Okay.
Ooh,
So let's start with some of these lists you see, let's talk first about most anticipated lists. And you're seeing them right now for the 21 books, right? All these lists that came out that said, these are the most anticipated books in 2021. These are the hyped books. These are the hot books, okay? And it's very often not visible to new writers who are watching all this from the outside, how some of these lists work, right? So when it comes to most anticipated lists, generally those journalists are given arcs 6+ months before the book is coming out. So when we're looking at books that are coming out in April, May, June, August, which are getting reviewed right now on these lists of kind of most anticipated and 21 lists, those arcs, advanced review copies, paper copies of the book have been in those journalists' hands since mid last year, September last year, okay? So these advanced review copies in paper come out 6+ months before the book's release. Well, what does that mean? It means that it's a path that is viable if you are a big publisher novel. So if your author is coming out through one of the big 5 for publishers, then they do this. They create paper arcs, and those arcs out there 6+ months in advance. And generally a publicist is the one reaching out to say, hey, I've got a paper arc. Would you like to evaluate this book for potentially being on the best of 2021 or most anticipated in 21 list? But if you're with a small publisher, like me, for example, I'm with a publisher called the Waldrose Press. Love them to death. They've been fabulous for me. Or like you, Anju, you didn't have paper copies 6+ months in advance.
No, because of COVID, we got the paper copies 4 weeks beforehand. That's it.
I didn't have paper copies until a few days before my book came out, maybe a week before my book came out. In fact, I didn't have a cover and a release date until 45 to 60 days is the normal for my publisher. And that is very normal for small publishers. Most small publishers, you're going to get that release date and cover, which is the minimum you need to do publicity for a book, 2 months, maybe 3 months before the book's release. So
when did you get your ebook arc? When did that come
I got my ebook arc around the same time. In fact, that was when I got my ebook arcs, was about 60 days before. Now, there are ways around that. If you've got a really good, not final copy edited, but very close to ready copy, I mean, you can work around that as an author. But the point I want to make is if these lists are being decided based on paper arcs 6+ months ago, right, that have been in their hands since, let's say, August, September last year, and you're coming out in mid-21 with a small publisher and your book doesn't yet have a cover or a date on it, you're not going to be on those lists. That's just the reality. Those lists are for big publisher books. It is a very, very rare exception that you will ever see a small publisher or a self-published book on any of those lists. And so that doesn't mean they're less good books. It's nothing about quality. It's just the way the process and the timing, and there's a bit of access there too, that these books tend to be put out there by publicists versus the authors sending them out themselves. But just to kind of set expectations, because this is a myth, I think, that people look at these lists and they say, oh, that book isn't on the list. That book's not as good as these other books. And sometimes it's just not within your wherewithal to do it because of the publishing path you chose. And that's fine. There are other ways to get your book out there, but I hate when people kind of misunderstand how these things work. Same thing with New York Times, okay? If you are selling primarily electronic copies, okay? So you could sell 2 million copies. So you look at someone like Barbara O'Neill, who is a many million copy best-selling author in women's fiction. Her books are fabulous. If you haven't read them, go read them. When We Believed in Mermaids has sold over 2 million copies, I believe. That book was not on the New York Times bestseller list, and it won't be, even though it sold 2 million copies, which is far beyond most New York Times bestselling list books. The way the New York Times bestseller list works is it's a set of bookstores that sell paper copies, and that's how it's measured. So if your book sells 2 million e-copies because it's an Amazon publishing book that came out through Lake Union, it's not going to show on a list that is compiled from bookstores selling paper copies. Not to ding the New York Times bestseller list authors. Those are amazing books. But you can be a multi-million-dollar copy best-selling author and never show up on the New York Times bestseller list. And I just think it's a myth, right? People think, oh, the New York Times bestseller list is a list of the best-selling books. No, it's not. It's a list of the best-selling books through a certain set of bookstores, which is cool, but not quite the same thing as a list of the best-selling books. And last comment, there is a list that's a bit more achievable as I understand it, which is the USA Today best-selling list, does look at electronic copies as well. If you want to get onto that list as I understand it, and I'd welcome anyone to tell me otherwise, I think you need to sell about 8,000 to 10,000 copies in a week to make the USA Today list, last I heard. So that'll give you a sense.
And these are paperback copies, obviously, that you're talking about.
No, the USA Today actually does e-copies count.
Oh.
So you can get on the USA Today list, for example, if you have a very successful Bookbub promo week, if you do things right.
Which is what one of our debut 2020 authors did, I think, last week.
Okay, let's talk about that. So Barbara Conray, whose book Nowhere Near Goodbye is a fabulous book. She had a US Bookbub, and she became a Amazon #1 bestseller. Mm-hmm. That's not the same as a USA Today list. Amazon #1 bestseller means that in the category that your book is in, and I'm a perfect example of this. So my book is in a category called feminist books. It's actually called like feminist theory because it's a feminist girl power, woman power book. And I became a #1 bestseller in that category. Now that is a different category than say women's fiction overall. To become a #1 bestseller in the women's fiction overall category, you got to sell like 4,000 copies in a day, which means you're in the USA Today bestseller range for a week, right? But I became an Amazon bestseller selling a lot fewer books because my book's in a smaller category. So an Amazon bestseller just means that you became #1 in whichever category your books are in. And that's not nearly as hard to achieve. Ideally, you want to make sure your book is in some small categories as well as big ones. And not to minimize what Barbara did, she got to be #1 in several of the biggest categories on Amazon for several days. The women's fiction category, the women's contemporary fiction category. So that's a huge deal. It's a great achievement for her, especially as a debut author, but it's not quite the same thing as the USA Today list.
Can you explain a little bit about what a Bookbub is?
Yeah. So first off, if you're an author and you're not yet on Bookbub, go claim your author profile on Bookbub. You definitely want to be on there. It's one of the places that, whereas Goodreads was new, say, how old is Goodreads? 10 plus years old. Whereas at one point Goodreads was new and it was the hot thing, Bookbub is the new Goodreads. It's way easier to use. It's got a really interesting business model. What they have is the ability to follow authors. So that's one reason that you want to have your author profile up there and filled in, because someone can follow you. And then when your book comes out, or when you have a special offer, all of those who follow you will get sent an alert to tell them about it. There is also the ability to do advertising and some other things, but the big thing when people talk about Bookbub that they're talking about is what's called the featured daily deal. Now, this is an email that goes out every day. It's organized by category. So readers sign up, for example, I like women's fiction and suspense, and they tell Bookbub that, and every day Bookbub sends out an email that will show them the special deals that day in women's fiction and suspense. These are great best-selling novels that are discounted to 99 cents, $1.99, $2.99. Now, here's the thing. They have, like for the women's fiction category of Bookbub, if you get on that featured daily deal, it goes to 2 million readers. And what I have seen, which has been proven out, is if you get a US Bookbub, a featured daily deal like Barbara was successful in doing, you will sell several thousand copies that day in the women's fiction category. So it is definitely worth doing. It's expensive. It'll cost you over $1,000. Sometimes the publisher will share the cost.
I was going to ask you that. How does that cost sharing work? Is it, self-pay?
Per publisher. I know some authors who their publisher will go half and half with them. I know some that the big publisher might pick it up for them, the full cost. In my case, if I do it, I have to pay the full cost. My publisher doesn't cover it for me. It just is publisher by publisher how they do it. Some will apply for you, some you have to apply yourself. The thing to know is a US Bookbub, only 1 in 10 get approved. So it's not a slam dunk to get one at all. Even though you're paying for it, it is not just go give them your money and you'll get one. They're looking at reviews. They're looking at the quality of the book and the book cover. They're looking at what the reviews say. They will go read your Amazon and your Bookbub review and your Goodreads reviews before they make that decision. And you're competing against other books that are asking for it in the same time frame. So there are lots of tips online on Bookbub's website about how to get a US Bookbub and what they look at and that kind of thing. But you definitely want to have good reviews and have a decent number of reviews if you're applying.
So how about choosing marketing plans for authors? How do we know where to go about it and how to begin? Do we put our money in Bookbub? Do we put it in a marketing company, in a publicity company? Do we, team up with 2 or 3 different avenues? How do we go about starting it?
Oh, believe me, if I could give you an answer to that question in one sentence, I would. In fact, I'm an ex-marketing person. Like before I became an author, I was a full-time marketing person. I ran marketing for big and small companies, and I launched several startups off the ground successfully. So believe me, this is a space I know. And it's why some of the myths out there really bother me. Okay, so I hate the fact that there are a lot of people out there who will happily take money from authors and provide no results. There are thousands of them. I've probably had at least 50 of them reach out to me, and I'm savvy enough in the marketing space to look at them and go, yeah, no.
How do you know? Lainey, how do you know?
Yeah.
Where did you look?
Visibility has limited value. So when you're trying to get your book out there for the first time, reviews have a lot of value. People make decisions based on reviews. Reviews can help you get a Bookbub. So doing something like a Bookstagram tour where many Bookstagrammers read your book and you get both visibility because they post it on their book account on Instagram, but they're also doing reviews and they're talking about the book. They're not just posting a photo, they're actually reviewing the book and putting those reviews on other platforms. To me, that has a huge amount of value. That's primarily how I got my book out there and how I built visibility. Buying a quarter page in some publication that has your book and a description of it, yeah, I don't think that's valuable for most people. It's very expensive. It'll cost you $500, $1,000 or more to do advertising. I think for a indie author, if your big publisher's doing it for you and they're doing it as part of a much broader campaign, it can totally make sense. But for an indie author, spending thousands of dollars on advertising type things is rarely going to pay off for you. I don't want to say never, and I want people to tell me if they've had the opposite experience because I'm spending a lot of time advising other authors now. But I think a Bookbub works. I think a Bookstagram tour can work. I think building your presence, building your email list, all the things that are recommended to indie authors can work. Getting out there on podcasts, I think, is being increasingly successful for authors. Getting out there to reviewers, getting out there into Facebook groups, some places where readers are can be successful for you. But I think paying for pure advertising where you just show up somewhere, I think has limited value. Try and go for places where it comes with an endorsement of some type. So what I mean by that is when you're on a site because they reviewed the book and they're promoting the review, they're actually endorsing your book. They're saying this is worth reading and this is why you should do it, right? So like Booktreb does that a little. Many sites do that where they're kind of combo review sites, and that can be of value, right? But if it's just, I'll put the cover of your book on the front page of my website with a write-up, that's not really an endorsement, that's an advertisement. And is that really going to convince someone? What will much more convince someone is if you have an author that you have built a connection with and they put it in their newsletter and they say to their readers, I enjoyed this book, you will too. That's got like credibility behind it. And so I would really look when you're in your early days for what can you do that gives your book credibility, borrowing from other authors' brands. This is something that Barbara Conroy did phenomenally well the week of her Bookbub. She had a lot of other people talk about it and talk about how they'd read her book and talk about how now it's only 99 cents. And so it wasn't just, hey, look, so-and-so's book is on sale. It was, I read this, it's a valuable book, you should read it, and it's on sale. So I would really look for those kind of opportunities over just, you know, an advert. And then let me talk about PR, because I've talked to probably 5 people about PR in the last few days. Okay, so when I see PR, I mean hiring a publicist. Okay, so hiring a publicist who costs a decent amount of money, whether it's 8 to 10 to 15 to 20K or more. And I've been through this discussion with so many authors in the last few days who are asking, do I do it or don't I do it? Is it worth the money or not worth the money? And the advice I gave all of them is take a really good publicist. I'm going to give you a scenario. Take a really good publicist, someone who knows their stuff, who knows what they're doing. So I'm not talking about someone who hung up their shingle on a website and doesn't know what the heck they're doing. A really good publicist who's connected. And 2 authors, both debuts, put $15,000 in with that same publicist. There is a very real scenario where one of them will become the book of the year that you are seeing everywhere. It seems like every magazine, every article, everybody's talking about that damn book. And the other one will get a couple of small local press articles and nothing more. And it's not even about the book itself and the quality of the book. It's about the moment in time. So like, look at what happened in 2020 with the pandemic. Certain books became phenomenally successful because they hit a nerve of what we wanted at that moment. Rom-coms did phenomenally for the last year because we're all stuck inside, we're bored, we can't go have a romantic relationship. And a lot of people didn't want to read heavy books. They wanted to read lighthearted, take me the heck out of this place books. And so a lot of rom-coms, boom, they took off, they got written about everywhere, they get phenomenal PR. And then you had some books that were just as well written, that were phenomenal books that didn't get the same pickup, but they had the same publicist. And so like the advice I give to people on hiring a publicist is know when you go in that you're making a bet on your book. And that word bet actually does mean bet. It means you have about a 50-50 of it totally paying off for you and a 50-50 of it not really being worth the money, even if you hire the best in the business. And just be aware of that, because if you can afford to make that bet on your career, you might still want to make it. But if you can't afford it, if you're putting everything you have into this, don't do it, because it's a 50-50 chance.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Some real deep thoughts and a lot of great avenues to think. So let me ask you, Lainey, you know, when I'm looking at different marketing companies and what they offer, some of them offer the a la carte, you know, where you can pick and choose what you want, combine it into a package and bundle it up. How do you know what to pick?
You have to kind of start with what are your goals? What are you trying to do, right? Like, so for me, as I brought out my debut with a small publisher, my goal isn't to sell 1 million copies. I'd be pretty unhappy if I thought that was what I was going to do with a debut small publisher book. My goal is to build my brand and my credibility and start getting readers to know who I am and build my career for the next few books. So when I see it from that angle, I want reviews. I want people to actually read the thing, even if it's not for a lot of money, right? If I can give the book out to more reviewers versus less, and I'm not even making any money off that, it's still building my brand and starting to get readers to read it, etc. And so I think it comes from, you know, what's your goal, right? Like, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet that I could tell you, like, do this one thing and it'll sell books, except for Bookbub. But you're building readership, you're building reviews, you're building credibility over time. For me, awards fall into that category. Awards don't sell books. There's another myth. Like, just because you win an award doesn't mean your Amazon ranking that day will suddenly spike and you'll sell twice as many books. Yeah, I've won some awards that made zero difference that day on sales or that week, but they give you credibility when you promote it out to people, when you talk about the awards you won. So I have 3 awards. When you intro me, it makes me sound a lot more credible, right? So it works in terms of building credibility. I have to put that out there. It's not like people are going to find my book because of those awards. Now, there are exceptions, right? I'm not talking about the Booker Prize here. I'm talking about some of the smaller awards that are a bit more within reach to indie or small or new authors. But, you know, people think if I win an award, suddenly my book will take off. I'm afraid that's not true, but it might have value. Like, I'm actually trying to get to the point that I can say my book is the winner of X number of awards. So I'm entering a bunch of them, and it doesn't cost me a ton of money because they're $50 or $100 each. So it seems like that would be worth it to me. But if I expected that to suddenly sell my book by itself, then I'd be disappointed. So kind of know your goals going in of what you're trying to get out of it. And don't assume that just because a site has a ton of views, that makes it valuable to you. There are a ton of companies out there who have 50,000 followers on Twitter who will charge you $50 to put your book on their Twitter. And if you go look at their Twitter, their average tweet gets 2 likes. The 2 likes are from the other 2 Twitter accounts that that same company owns. There's no engagement. Nobody's commenting. Nobody's sharing. What a waste of money. And I've seen at least 20 companies like that who are like, I will give you exposure to 100,000 readers because they have 50,000 followers on Twitter and 50,000 followers on their Facebook page. What you want to look at is engagement. If they're not actually engaging with real readers, who cares how many followers they have, right? Like, I could go out in the street with a hunk of meat and a bunch of dogs would follow me down the street. It doesn't mean they're going to buy my book. Like, it doesn't matter if there's a bunch of followers.
That's a great example.
So the other thing to look at is, unfortunately, with Facebook groups, it's a nice way to get exposure and start putting your book out there. Just be aware that a lot of groups are people who are looking for freebies and giveaways. And so even though you might be on a group and a bunch of people might engage with you, you kind of have to look at the quality of the conversation, not just, you know, look, this post got 50 people responding, but all 50 people were like, yes, send me a free book. So kind of look at the quality of the engagement, not just the numbers.
Well,
I definitely think there's some good Facebook groups where they have some really good conversations, but the biggest problem is those groups don't let the author promote.
yes, you cannot. The moment you try, it's run out.
Can I do a plug for a really good readers Facebook group? So I'm actually a host on a group called Blue Sky Book Chat, which is a group of authors who've got together, and it's got a bunch of best-selling authors on it. And we host it and we put content out there and we share the inside of our lives and what's going on. We're going to do a huge giveaway week in February. Actually, we don't primarily do giveaways. We primarily engage with readers about books and share what we're reading, etc. But that's a great example of a really engaged group where the readers are totally engaged with us and they're bringing in the books they enjoyed and they're sharing. I think there are a lot like readers' coffee houses like that. I think there's a lot of great Facebook groups. So don't get me wrong, I'm not dinging Facebook groups, but I'm also saying, like, when you're evaluating anything, look at the quality of the engagement, just not the volume of engagement, because you know, something might have equivalent number of members, but one is kind of all about giveaways and the other one is more, what are you reading and what did you enjoy? And you kind of just want to look at the quality as well as the volume of the engagement when you're making decisions.
Well, I think Lindsay's giving me the eye. I can see.
Okay, I have one more, because I brought it up earlier, and I don't want to disappoint people. This Amazon 50 and 100 reviews things. Okay, so this is, I think, the most annoying myth out there in the writer community, and I see people propagating it all the time because someone told them, and they believe it because someone they know told them, and so they tell someone else. Okay, so at one point, I believe it was true that having 50 books had an effect on the Amazon algorithm, because if you remember, they used to do this thing where they would recommend like books. So now if you go on Amazon, what you see is they actually recommend people like you bought these other books. It's not just you would like this because you like that. It's actually people bought these other books. There used to be another feature, which was more like people like you like these kind of things. There is, I will tell you, I went from 49 to 50 reviews. I went from 99 to 100 reviews. There is no magic spike in your Amazon and your sales the day you go from 48 to 49 to 50 or 50 to 51. And I just hate when people propagate that rumor because I think it's bullshit, okay? So having more reviews is good, because it gives you credibility, because yes, the algorithm likes more reviews, but there is no magic like benchmark at 50 and 100, as people keep telling us. Having 49 is just as good as 50. As far as I can tell, like there's no difference. And I welcome anyone who's going to come educate me otherwise, but I have not yet been able to find any reason for this to be true. And it certainly wasn't true in my experience. I think I'm up to 160 odd reviews. I am so grateful for every review. Every review makes a difference, but there is no magic benchmark number that after this number, suddenly Amazon will sell more of your book. That is, I'm going to call that one just not true.
Well, thank you for busting that myth. And thank you for teaching us that long-term vision goal is where we should begin for any marketing strategy, the building of the brand and the building of the vision and the goal for not just that 1 or 2 books, but the whole series of books we have. This has been great. Thank you so much, Lainey. Lindsay, what are you thinking?
No, this was fantastic. A lot of great advice, a lot of good myth busting. So thank you so much. I know everyone's going to be excited to see you again.
Yep. And if you all look below the video, you'll see all of Lainey's links. She does do podcasts. She does a lot of interviews on Facebook. She does a lot of live streaming. She also interviews other authors, brings their books out in the light, and then she shines her wisdom on all of us as well. So Lainey, thank you so much. We have really enjoyed having you, and we definitely hope to have you join us again.
Thanks, Anju. This was so much fun. Thanks for letting me come and chat with you both.
No, thank you for teaching us everything. And for those who want to get in touch with Lainey, just look at the links, click, and you'll find Lainey wherever you need to say hi to her. All right. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.